The swimming pool shimmered in the California sun, and Marilyn Monroe stood at its edge wearing nothing but a flesh-colored swimsuit that would photograph as nudity. It was June 1st, 1962, her 36th birthday, and she was about to make Hollywood history by filming the first mainstream nude scene by a major star. The crew fell silent as she prepared for the take. George Cukor, the legendary director, called for action, and Marilyn dove into the water, not knowing that in exactly 6 weeks and 3 days, she would be dead. Not knowing that this unfinished film would become a monument to everything that went wrong in her final months. Not knowing that the studio executives watching from the shadows had already decided she was more trouble than she was worth. Something's Got to Give was supposed to be simple, a romantic comedy, a remake of My Favorite Wife, a vehicle designed to prove that Marilyn Monroe was still bankable, still beautiful, still the biggest star in Hollywood. After years of difficult productions, failed marriages, and public struggles with mental health and addiction, this was her comeback. 20th Century Fox had invested millions. Dean Martin, one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men, had signed on specifically to work with her. The script was light, unchallenging, the kind of crowd pleaser that should have been easy money for everyone involved. Sid Charisse had been cast as the other woman, Wally Cox as the comic relief. It was supposed to be fun, breezy, commercial, a guaranteed hit, but nothing with Marilyn Monroe was ever simple. By the time filming began in April 1962, she was already in crisis. Her recent divorce from Arthur Miller had left her emotionally devastated. Her affair with President Kennedy had ended badly, leaving her feeling used and discarded by yet another powerful man. She was dependent on a cocktail of prescription drugs, barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake, tranquilizers to function. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, was treating her with experimental methods that may have done more harm than good. And she was terrified. Terrified that at 36, in an industry obsessed with youth, Hollywood considered her too old. Terrified that younger actresses like Tuesday Weld and Anne Margaret were taking her roles. Terrified that this comeback film would fail and prove all her critics right, that she was washed up, unreliable, unemployable. The first warning signs came immediately. April 23, 1962, the first day of shooting. Marilyn didn't show up. She called in sick, a respiratory infection, her publicist said. The production shut down for the day, costing the studio thousands of dollars in wasted crew time, equipment rental, and lost schedule. She returned after a few days, but she was late to set, sometimes by hours. When she did arrive, she needed dozens of takes to get through simple scenes. Her lines, which she'd never had an easy time memorizing, now seemed impossible for her to retain. Take after take after take, while the crew waited. The other actors grew frustrated, and the costs mounted. George Cukor, the director, was a Hollywood legend who'd worked with every major star from Katharine Hepburn to Judy Garland. But even Cukor was reaching his limit with Marilyn. "She's not the Marilyn I knew," he told the studio executives privately. "Something's very wrong with her. She can barely function." The executives didn't care about what was wrong. They cared about the budget, the schedule, the bottom line. They started keeping detailed records of her absences and late arrivals, building a case for what they already knew was inevitable. Marilyn Monroe was going to have to go, but the most shocking part was still coming. Because despite everything, despite the lateness, the missed days, the endless retakes, when Marilyn was actually in front of the camera and got the take right, she was magical. The footage that exists from Something's Got to Give shows a woman who still had it, who could still light up the screen with nothing but a smile, who was still one of the most captivating performers in cinema history. In the scenes that worked, you can see glimpses of what this movie could have been. Marilyn dancing with Dean Martin, the chemistry between them effortless and natural. Marilyn doing physical comedy, her timing still impeccable when she could focus. Marilyn simply walking across a room, every movement infused with that indefinable quality that made her a star. Dean Martin, watching her struggle through takes, felt protective of her in a way that surprised him. He'd signed on for this film specifically because he wanted to work with Marilyn Monroe, the legend, the icon. But on set, he found himself working with a frightened, fragile woman who was clearly in over her head. Between takes, he'd try to make her laugh, tell her jokes, reassure her that she was doing great even when they both knew she wasn't. "Don't let them get to you, sweetheart," he'd say. "You're Marilyn Monroe. They need you more than you need them." But even as he said it, he could see in her eyes that she didn't believe it anymore. By mid-May, the situation had deteriorated completely. Marilyn had missed 12 of the film's first 20 shooting days. The production was already a month behind schedule and $1 million over budget. The studio accountants were having panic attacks. The insurance company was threatening to pull coverage. And the Fox executives were in daily emergency meetings, trying to figure out what to do about their most expensive problem. Her absences weren't always fake. She genuinely was sick, struggling with chronic sinusitis that made her head feel like it was splitting open, exhaustion that made getting out of bed feel impossible, and the effects of the pills she was taking just to get through each day. But the studio didn't distinguish between legitimate illness and what they saw as unprofessional behavior. All they knew was that they had a movie that might never get finished, and a star who seemed determined to sabotage it. And then came the president's birthday. May 19, 1962, Madison Square Garden, New York City. President Kennedy's 45th birthday celebration, and Marilyn had been invited to perform. It was the kind of invitation she couldn't refuse. The President of the United States wanted her there. But she was scheduled to shoot on May 17th and 18th, critical scenes that the production desperately needed. The studio refused to give her permission to go. They sent her memos. They had her agent call her. They made it clear that if she went to New York, there would be consequences. Marilyn went anyway. She flew to New York, squeezed into that now famous crystal-covered dress, 12,000 rhinestones sewn directly onto her body, so tight she had to be sewn into it, and sang, "Happy Birthday, Mr. President," in a breathy, sensual performance that would become iconic. Peter Lawford introduced her as the late Marilyn Monroe when she was running behind, a joke that would seem eerily prophetic 3 months later. The president laughed. The crowd went wild. And back in Los Angeles, the Fox executives watched the news coverage and made their decision. She was done. The studio was furious. Not just because she'd missed 2 more days of filming, but because she'd publicly chosen the president over her professional commitments. The press coverage of her New York appearance made it clear where her priorities lay. She'd shown up for JFK but couldn't be bothered to show up for her own movie. Fox executives held emergency meetings. The word coming from those meetings was ominous. Marilyn Monroe was finished. Not just on this film, but in Hollywood. They were going to make an example of her. Show the industry what happened when stars thought they were bigger than the studios. This is exactly where everything changed. Because when Marilyn returned from New York and came back to the set, something was different. She knew she was in trouble. Real trouble. She could feel it in the way the assistant directors looked at her. The way conversations stopped when she walked into a room. The tension coming from Cukor. And she genuinely tried to make things right. She showed up on time. She was prepared. She worked hard. She was friendly to the crew, apologetic about the delays, desperate to prove she could still do this. And on June 1st, her birthday, when Cukor suggested they film the swimming pool scene that everyone had been nervous about, she agreed without hesitation. The pool scene is fascinating to watch now, knowing what we know. The production had been worried about it for weeks. How do you film a nude scene with your biggest star in 1962, when the production code still had strict rules about what could be shown? The solution was a flesh-colored swimsuit that would photograph as nudity from certain angles. Marilyn arrived on set that morning, nervous but determined. This was going to be the scene that saved her, that reminded everyone why she was worth the trouble, that proved she could still deliver what Hollywood wanted from her. They set up the shot. Marilyn stood at the edge of the pool. The camera rolled. And she dove in. The water was cold, colder than she expected, and the shock of it made her gasp. But she surfaced, smiling, her hair slicked back, water streaming down her face. Cukor called for another take. And another. Marilyn swam, dove, surfaced over and over. At one point, she pulled off the flesh-colored swimsuit completely, swimming genuinely nude while the crew stood shocked and mesmerized. "This is for posterity," she joked. "Might as well give them the real thing." The crew was shocked. The photographers captured every moment. These photos would become some of the most famous images of Marilyn's career. And Marilyn seemed almost defiant, as if she was proving something, to the studio, to Hollywood, to herself. "Look at me," she seemed to be saying. "I'm still Marilyn Monroe. I'm still worth it. I can still deliver what you want. I'm still here. I'm still relevant. Don't throw me away." Between takes, crew members brought her a birthday cake. They sang "Happy Birthday." She smiled, cut the cake, thanked everyone. But those who were watching closely could see the desperation behind the smile, the fear in her eyes. This felt like a last stand, but it was too late. The decision had already been made. On June 8, 1962, after only 32 days of filming out of a scheduled 60, 20th Century Fox fired Marilyn Monroe from Something's Got to Give. The official reason was repeated and willful violations of her contract. They sent her a telegram, not even a phone call or a face-to-face meeting, informing her that she was being replaced by Lee Remick, a younger, more reliable actress. They also filed a lawsuit against her for $500,000, claiming her behavior had destroyed the production, made it impossible to complete the film on schedule and on budget, and caused them massive financial losses. The movie was officially shut down. Marilyn was at home when she got the telegram. She read it once, twice, 3 times, unable to process what it was saying. Fired, replaced, sued. Her publicist found her sitting on the floor of her bedroom, the telegram crumpled in her hand, crying. "They fired me," she kept saying. "They actually fired me." As if she couldn't believe it, couldn't accept that they'd actually done it. That Marilyn Monroe, the biggest star in Hollywood, could be discarded like a broken prop, replaced like a malfunctioning piece of equipment. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet, though. Because the story doesn't end with Marilyn's firing. It ends with what happened next, and it's even more heartbreaking than the firing itself. When Dean Martin heard that Marilyn had been replaced, he refused to continue with the film. His contract, it turned out, specified that he was working with Marilyn Monroe, not just any actress Fox wanted to plug into the role. "I signed to work with Marilyn," he told the studio executives who came to convince him to continue. "No Marilyn, no movie? You want to sue me too? Go ahead. But I'm not working with anyone else." It was an act of loyalty that shocked Hollywood and briefly gave Marilyn hope that she might be rehired. Dean Martin was an A-list star, a member of the Rat Pack, somebody who could work whenever and wherever he wanted. He didn't need this movie, but he'd made a commitment to Marilyn, and he was keeping it. When Marilyn heard what Dean had done, she called him, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you for standing by me. Nobody ever stands by me." Dean, uncomfortable with the emotion, tried to play it off. "Hey, come on now. We're a team, right? Martin and Monroe. They can't have one without the other." The publicity around her firing was devastating. Newspapers ran stories about how unreliable she was, how she'd destroyed a multi-million-dollar production, how her career was over at the ancient age of 36. Time magazine put her on the cover with the headline, "The End of Marilyn Monroe?" Hedda Hopper, the feared gossip columnist, wrote a scathing column about how Marilyn had squandered her talent and her opportunities. Her enemies in Hollywood, and she'd accumulated many over the years of being difficult, demanding, late, took the opportunity to pile on. She was washed up. She was unemployable. She was finished. The era of Marilyn Monroe was over, and Marilyn, reading these reports in her Brentwood home, spiraled deeper into depression and dependency on the pills that were slowly killing her. She stopped leaving the house, stopped answering the phone, stopped eating regularly. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, watched helplessly as Marilyn retreated further and further into herself. Dr. Greenson came by daily, trying to keep her stable, but even he was starting to realize that his experimental treatment methods weren't working. If anything, they were making things worse. But wait a minute. Don't miss this detail. Because even in her darkest moment, Marilyn tried to fight back. She gave interviews defending herself, explaining that she'd been genuinely ill, that she'd been trying her best, that the studio had been unfair. She appeared on the cover of Life magazine, photographed by Bert Stern in what would become known as The Last Sitting, nude photos of Marilyn that were both beautiful and haunting, showing a woman who was still stunning but clearly fragile, clearly struggling. She reached out to other studios, trying to prove she could still work, still be a star. She talked about projects she wanted to do, roles that would showcase her dramatic abilities. A film adaptation of The Brothers Karamazov, playing Grushenka. Serious drama, the kind of work that would force people to see her as an actress. Not just a sex symbol, she even discussed the possibility of Fox rehiring her for Something's Got to Give, if Dean Martin's refusal to work with anyone else forced their hand. Her agent was in negotiations. The studio was reconsidering. Lee Remick had reportedly backed out, not wanting to be the actress who replaced Marilyn Monroe. The gossip columns were speculating that Fox might have to eat crow and bring Marilyn back. It wasn't final, but it was possible. She might get her comeback after all. Just needed to hold on a little longer. Just needed to stay stable enough to prove she could do it. Just needed to make it through this dark period. And incredibly, it almost worked. By late July 1962, Fox was seriously reconsidering. The negative publicity from firing their biggest star had hurt them more than they'd anticipated. Dean Martin's refusal to continue had made the situation more complicated and expensive. They couldn't just plug in another actress and another leading man and start over. And the footage they had of Marilyn, particularly the pool scene, which had been leaked to the press and created enormous buzz, was so good, so commercially valuable, that they were starting to think maybe they should give her another chance. The accountants ran the numbers. Starting from scratch with new leads would cost more than accommodating Marilyn's difficulties and letting her finish. Preliminary discussions began about resuming production in September or October, with Marilyn back in the role, maybe with a nurse on set to help manage her health issues, maybe with a more flexible schedule. It wasn't final, but it was possible. Marilyn clung to that hope like a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood. Maybe she could come back. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe she'd get one more chance to prove herself, to show that she was still Marilyn Monroe, still worth the trouble, still relevant. She started trying to get healthier, cut back on some of the pills, tried to eat better, talked about getting a personal trainer, made plans for the fall, called Dean Martin to thank him again, and talk about how great their scenes together were going to be when they resumed filming. "We're going to show them," she told him. "We're going to make the best movie anyone's ever seen." Marilyn never got that chance. On August 5th, 1962, exactly 6 weeks and 4 days after being fired from Something's Got to Give, she was found dead in her bedroom by Eunice Murray. The official cause was acute barbiturate poisoning, ruled a probable suicide. She was 36 years old. The movie that was supposed to be her comeback had instead been her final film, and it would never be completed. The roughly 37 minutes of footage that existed, just a fraction of what should have been a 90-minute comedy, became a ghost of what might have been, a monument to wasted potential and tragic timing. In the aftermath of Marilyn's death, the story of Something's Got to Give took on new meaning. Fox executives, who'd been so angry at her just weeks before, suddenly tried to rewrite history. They released statements about how talented she was, how much they'd valued her, how tragic her loss was to cinema. George Cukor, who'd complained about her being impossible to work with, now talked about her brilliance and vulnerability, about how he'd seen flashes of what could have been her greatest performance. The same industry that had written her off as finished now lionized her as an irreplaceable talent taken too soon. The $500,000 lawsuit was quietly dropped. Suddenly, suing a dead woman seemed grotesque, even for Hollywood. The footage from the film, particularly the pool scene, became some of the most valuable and frequently shown material from Marilyn's career. That scene, filmed on her birthday while she was fighting for her professional life, became emblematic of her image. Beautiful, vulnerable, willing to bear everything for the camera, trying desperately to prove her worth. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The scene that was supposed to save her career had instead become a monument to her final struggle, watched by millions as a piece of Hollywood history rather than as part of a completed film. You won't believe this, but the story gets even more complex. Because in the years since Marilyn's death, historians and biographers have uncovered the full extent of what was happening in her life during the filming of Something's Got to Give. She wasn't just dealing with career pressures and health problems. She was dealing with the end of her affair with President Kennedy, who'd grown distant after the Madison Square Garden performance made their connection too public. She was dealing with Bobby Kennedy's increasingly desperate attempts to distance the Kennedy family from her, to make her understand that she needed to stop calling, stop expecting anything from them, stop being a potential scandal waiting to happen. She was dealing with FBI surveillance. J. Edgar Hoover had her phone tapped and her house watched, gathering information about her connections to the Kennedys and to left-wing intellectuals that he could use as leverage or blackmail. She was dealing with financial problems that most people didn't know about, despite her fame. She was constantly in debt, owing money to the IRS, to her lawyers, to Dr. Greenson for his expensive daily sessions. She was dealing with the constant, crushing loneliness that had haunted her since childhood. The feeling that nobody really knew her, that everyone just wanted Marilyn Monroe and nobody cared about Norma Jean, and she was dealing with all of this while trying to show up on a movie set every day and be charming and funny and sexy for the cameras. The film set, chaotic as it was, represented something important to Marilyn, proof that she still mattered, that she was still a star, that she wasn't washed up at 36. It was her identity, her purpose, her proof that she existed and had value. When Fox fired her, they didn't just end a production. They confirmed her worst fears about herself. That she was too difficult, too damaged, too much trouble, not worth the effort anymore. That at 36, Hollywood had decided she was past her prime, replaceable by younger actresses who wouldn't cause problems. For someone whose entire sense of self-worth was tied up in being desired, being wanted, being Marilyn Monroe, that rejection was catastrophic. Dean Martin's refusal to continue without her was one of the few bright spots in that dark period. Here, finally, was someone who valued her enough to put his own career on the line, someone who didn't see her as replaceable, someone who recognized that Something's Got to Give without Marilyn Monroe wasn't the same movie, wasn't worth making. In her final weeks, Marilyn reportedly called Dean multiple times to thank him, emotional at his loyalty, at having someone finally stand by her when everyone else was walking away. It was the kind of gesture she'd been searching for her whole life, someone choosing her, standing by her, saying she was irreplaceable. But even that couldn't save her from the spiral she was in. The combination of professional devastation, personal heartbreak, physical illness, and drug dependency was too much. The pills that were supposed to help her sleep, help her wake up, help her cope with anxiety and depression, Nembutal, Seconal, chloral hydrate, a pharmacy's worth of barbiturates and sedatives, they were killing her. And in her Brentwood home in the early morning hours of August 5th, whether by accident or intention, whether by her own hand or someone else's, Marilyn Monroe took too many pills and never woke up. What you've seen is nothing compared to the human cost of Hollywood's impatience and cruelty. Marilyn Monroe died 6 weeks after being fired from Something's Got to Give. 6 weeks. In that time, she went from a working actress fighting for her career to a dead woman who'd become a tragic legend. If Fox had been more patient, if they'd given her the time and support she needed, if they'd recognized that her behavior came from illness and trauma rather than malice, she might have finished the film. She might have gotten the comeback she desperately wanted. She might have lived to see her 40th birthday, her 50th, might have had the chance to grow old and evolve as an actress the way she'd always dreamed of doing. The unfinished film, that ghost of what might have been, stands as an accusation. not just of Fox's impatience, but of an entire system that created stars like Marilyn Monroe and then devoured them when they became inconvenient. Hollywood built her up, profited enormously from her image, and then discarded her the moment she became more expensive than they wanted to tolerate. And in the end, that rejection, professional, public, devastating, may have been the final push that sent her over the edge into the darkness she'd been fighting all her life. Something's got to give. The title, chosen before anyone knew how prophetic it would become, haunts the story. Something did have to give. And what gave was Marilyn Monroe, her health, her career, her hope, and finally, her life. The pool scene plays on forever, though. Marilyn diving into that water on her birthday, beautiful and doomed, giving everything she had one more time, proving she still had it, not knowing it would be among the last things she ever filmed. That image, frozen forever in those 37 minutes of incomplete film, is both triumphant and tragic. Marilyn Monroe as she wanted to be seen, and Marilyn Monroe as she really was. 6 weeks later, she would be gone. The movie would remain unfinished, and Hollywood would move on. Which city are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Fox should have been more patient with Marilyn? Could this story have ended differently if she'd been given more support? Should studios prioritize their stars' well-being over budgets and schedules? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Boulevard of Monroe for more stories about Hollywood's hidden tragedies, the cost of fame, and the human beings behind the legends. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story.